Kosovën tonë të vogël ka shumë të huaj që vinë e shkojnë dhe që me vendimet e tyre dhe me pozitat e tyre bëjnë ndikim të madh në vendimarrje në Kosovë. Njëri prej tyre është Pse Sparkes, i cili prej vitit 2008 dhe 2010 ka qenë ambasador i Anglisë Kosovë, e mandej prej vitit 2010 dhe 2012 ka funksionu si zëvendësshef i EULEX-it. Ne kemi vendosur që edhe këta të huaj, edhe pse nuk i zgjedhin vetë, me i thirr për me dhanë llogari për punën që e kanë bërë këtu. Dhe sot jemi me Pse Sparkesin, zëvendësshefin e EULEX-it deri tash kohëve të fundit, i cili me të kryer mandatin ka ardhur jeta në Kosovë për të folë lidhur me ngjarjet që kanë ndodhur gjatë karrierës së tij dhe për të dhënë llogari për disa sende që s'kan shkuar si duhet. Good evening. You're on the way out to Kosovo now, but you've been here as UK ambassador from 2008 to 2010. Let's start with the general question. What are your most three proudest things you've achieved as an international here? And what are your three biggest regrets?
Okay. Well, I think coming to Kosovo as the British ambassador just after independence and after all the events that led up to independence, I think as a Brit in particular, I felt that I needed to ensure that in a multi-ethnic Kosovo, Serbs that wish to live in peace within a sovereign Kosovo would be able to do so. And I think a lot of what I was doing in terms of the projects that we did for the returns of Serbs to their houses after the conflict, in terms of the effort I made to get Serbs to return to the Svinjare village south of Mitrovica, in terms of my chairmanship of the Kosovo Property Agency, which was 90% of the people who were displaced from their homes in the conflict and needed to have their title to the land legitimized were Serbs. So all that I think was a useful contribution, and perhaps most particularly I was strong in persuading initially the Americans and others to go with the municipal elections in the new Ahtisaari Serb municipalities in 2009. There was a lot of doubt about whether Serbs would cooperate with these elections and put themselves in a position of being able to be run by their own people in the autonomous way envisaged in the plan. But we were able to do it, and it was a success, and I feel good about that.
But what about the regrets and things that didn't go down so well in the last 4 years you've been here?
Okay, well, I think my biggest regret, frankly, is not explaining to the people properly why EULEX could not cooperate with the embargo of Serbian goods, which the Minister Mimosa Kusari Lila imposed on the 20th of July 2011. The reason for this was not to do with status neutrality and our unwillingness to engage with the Kosovan authorities and their wishes. It was that operating for the European Union with the principle of free movement of goods, trade embargoes, however justified, and most people thought it was entirely understandable that Kosovo should be angry about the long Serbian game on customs stamps. However justified, that trade embargo as a measure is not something the European Union with its values could support. And therefore we were not able to support it. It made the government angry. It led directly to the 25th of July 2011 and the attempt by force to impose Kosovan sovereignty in the north, with consequences that we know since. So I feel that we did not explain that well, and we should have explained it more. Otherwise, well, I think generally I'm not happy with the way the EU has positioned itself on Kosovo. I mean, the 5 non-recognizing states and their perspective being one thing as opposed to the 22 states being another has been a constant kind of complication in our lives. But in any case, even among some of the recognizers, I think that the EU has given Serbia too easy a ride, and that big things like the candidacy for Serbia and the accession talks should have been sold better in terms of Serbian cooperation with Kosovo.
And your third regret? Is there any?
Third regret? Well, I haven't got the North Kosovo Serb leaders and the government of Kosovo talking to each other purposefully. And reading across, as you can to a degree, from the Northern Ireland process, I believe we are only going to get lasting, purposeful, normal, prosperous situation in the North when the people of the North buy into the arrangements. There has not been enough communication by the government of Kosovo with those people, however difficult it may be. There's not been enough goodwill on their part, and as part of the dialogue that we're now entering into, sooner or later those players in the North need to be able to make their voices heard, so that at least they can sell it to their own people.
On the other hand, I want to go on and talk now exactly for a little bit what you touched on, the performance of EULEX. How would you evaluate, now that your mission is over, we expect you to be a bit more frank and tell us about how would you evaluate its successes and failures?
I would say that we have done good work which does not always hit the media. Solid work with the police and the customs, in terms of bringing them up to more methodical professional standards. Customs has been a year-on-year success in terms of raising money for the Kosovan budget. We have had some success, although the media is rather loath to give it to us, in difficult and high-profile cases.
Such as?
Including senior people. Such as, for example, in 2010, the General Director of the PTK was convicted for abuse of official position. In 2010 also the President of the Kosovo Assembly was convicted for misappropriation in office. In 2011 we convicted business leaders for fraud related to the Credit Bank of Pristina. And this year, 2012, Kola Puka, a former judge, was found guilty of issuing unlawful decisions and sentenced to 10 years imprisonment, which was confirmed on appeal. Indictments, of course, are only indictments, and therefore one must always say that the people in question are innocent until proved guilty. But we have issued indictments for corruption against a Deputy Prime Minister, against a Permanent Secretary in a ministry, against a senior former minister, and against a senior prosecutor from the SPRK. So I would say it's not entirely a blank sheet.
Good. You've just had a chance to go through the positive sides of achievements, but I still want to talk about some things that have been mentioned in the media. You've been criticized by civil society and other stakeholders. Some have alleged that your EULEX's investigations, senior level corruption, have tended to pick up upon people that the Prime Minister was happy to see removed. That's the case with criticism you got with the central bank governor who was arrested, detained and obliged to resign on charges that in the end ended up not to be much upon closer examination. And you have gotten the same biggest criticism about the case of Fatmir Limaj, who's charged with corruption, after he became a political thorn in the Prime Minister's side. What do you say to such people? Are those observations fair, that EULEX chose people who were politically acceptable to a certain elite to be investigated?
I believe that to characterize what we've done entirely in those terms would be wrong. I believe that there has occasionally been attempted political interference. Personally, I think that was at play in the governor of the central bank case, and one of the responsible prosecutors for that case has now been indicted for corruption. This is a very, very political environment. There have been senior people in EULEX's sites. There still are senior people in EULEX's sites. Therefore, it's very difficult for us to divorce ourselves from the politics. As far as Brussels is concerned, there is still a little bit of the need to preserve stability and the wider political settlement in the region, and not therefore to want to rock the boat too much. There are occasions when that can sit very uneasily with the requirements of the rule of law.
Tell us an example of when it was more important, and it still is more important for the mission, to not rock the boat and keep stability rather than have a priority of rule of law and arrest people if that is needed.
Well, I mean, the best example is North Kosovo. It would not be impossible for EULEX to arrest some of the people that we need to arrest up there. But in current circumstances, if we did it, not only would we involve a lot of our own people, several hundred KFOR, in such operations, exposing them, as we know, to real risk, but we would also inflame a population which is still not fully addressing the realities of who is working for their good and who is not.
Is it only the north of Kosovo, or are there no-go areas in the rest of the region of Kosovo?
There are some municipalities where the individuals in question might think that they are above the law, and all I would say to that is, we shall see.
Can you be more specific than that?
No.
Why not?
Because it's sub judice.
You talked about local prosecutor in the Prime Minister's task force being compromised, Nazmi Mustafa, who is now, who was head of anti-corruption task force and now is under investigation for corruption. But it's not only the locals who have compromised the EULEX's mission. You have other occasions, such as the investigator in the Fatmi Lima's case, Troy Wilkinson, who we now know was being paid by Lima's camp. On the other hand, you also have in the French media allegations that General de Manac's special advisor has very close ties with Prime Minister Thaçi, and these French media have said that this is to the extent that he's in daily contact with senior figures in SHIK. Now, a third example of compromising the position of EULEX is documented intercepts in the corruption case against former Minister of Health, Ilir Tolaj, who is accused of claiming that this advisor agreed to help him. Is everyone in EULEX pulling in the same direction?
Well, I'm aware of the allegations about the individual that you're mentioning here. I've no comment on those allegations in themselves. You mentioned the French media, it's also appeared in the Serb media, and we should always aim off for propaganda there. All I would say about the individual in question is that he would probably be better employed in intelligence services than in a rule of law mission.
So you admit that there is a connection with SHIK between a very close advisor to de Manac and SHIK?
I didn't say that, but I did say that he will be better employed in intelligence services than in a rule of law mission.
Is that the case with two generals that headed the EULEX? Basically, why is commanders, generals of the armies, why are generals of armies a good choice for leading a rule of law mission?
I mean, generals have their strengths, and certainly when it comes to the organizing and planning of complicated and sensitive operations, which might involve risk to personnel and so on, in terms of high-profile arrests or in terms of activities in the north. That's where I see the real strength and training of military personnel. Where it may be that that kind of background is not so appropriate, is that in the military tradition there is one boss, he gives instructions, everybody obeys the orders. In a civilian mission as heterogeneous as EULEX, with 32 different nationalities, with different cultures of police and customs and prosecutors and judges and forensic scientists and diplomats, you actually need a more inclusive approach, a more diplomatic and a more empowering approach, and delegation which really means what it says. actually expecting prosecutors and judges to obey instructions without question, as would be the case in the proudest of military traditions, doesn't make sense. So there is some tension there, and it's not always ideal.
Back in November 2010, I found statements where you said that that people like Fatmi Limaj and Azem Sylla, who are on the list of being investigated, should not go on political party lists as officials to be elected. Now, since there have been many more scandals, corruption scandals involving high officials in the Kosovo government, and there has been very few resignations and suspensions. What would you say what does this say about our political elite?
Well, I think basically I haven't changed my view on what I said in 2010. I think that the honourable position for somebody who finds themselves accused is to say, if he believes it, I'm innocent of these charges. This is unfair, but nonetheless, I recognise that my ability to do my job in government or parliament or wherever is compromised until this cloud is removed from my head. So I will clear my name and I will step down or suspend myself until my name has been cleared. I think that is the honourable position, and unfortunately not too many people have taken it.
But what is this political elite then to you? Are they objects for investigation as EULEX officials, or are they your partners?
Some members of what you term the political elite have been under investigation and are under investigation. I think the people of Kosovo might be misled if they felt that everybody was, or even the majority. The fact is that Kosovo has its leaders. And they are our partners in our efforts as EULEX to bring Kosovo to European rule of law standards. Especially after the end of supervised independence, it is up to your leaders to decide what happens. They can throw EULEX out tomorrow if they wish.
That's looking more likely more and more as time goes by, but we'll talk about that, but first, how much has our leadership been able to shape the EULEX mission to its liking? Have they been able to decide on senior officials who run it? Or have their say and listen to it?
I think it's not, I mean, for the most part, no. I think there may have been one or two efforts to influence senior appointments. As far as I know, they've had limited success. But
have they had success with any appointments? Like recently in the press, it was printed in a local media in Kosovo that the Prime Minister wants Demanak's a mandate extended till January, until elections in the PDK are finished, to ensure that there is more stability in what investigations are taken over. Would you say that's a fair report?
I don't know, and I could only speculate.
Do you believe that EULEX will close in 2014?
I think the time has to come for us to remove ourselves and allow Kosovo to, if you like, sink or swim. But I want to make one thing very clear. I mean, you can say that we're ever more dependent on the goodwill of the Kosovan political elite whom we are investigating. So at the end of the day, Kosovo's big strategic objective, which we thoroughly share, and as former British ambassador, above all I share, is for Kosovo to get into the European Union. That requires standards. The standards are not negotiable, they have to be met. So if it is decided by Kosovo's leaders, elected leaders, that EULEX is too hot to handle and we should be thrown out, then the price is that Kosovo will have to wait many, many more years before they join the European Union, which is a heavy price to pay.
Is your mission becoming basically a victim of its own success? The better you get at catching the corruption, the shorter your mission will be.
Well, I mean, we have to look at, firstly, at what the Assembly of Kosovo did. It had a choice to do something else, but it chose to endorse our executive mandate for another 2 years. I think it was a very wise decision, because the continuation of our executive mandate gives another period of confidence to Kosovo's developing judges and prosecutors themselves to be backstopped by internationals on decisions that have to be made.
And is 2 years enough for your prosecutors to finish big cases you have begun?
I hope so.
Or will you leave them halfway and transfer them to the local prosecutors?
Well, obviously, if there are cases at the time, whenever that is, that our member states decide we should leave, if there are cases that are still ongoing, then they would be transferred to the Kosovans. But do I think EULEX will still be here in 2014? Or there may be some elements. I think it's always going to be very difficult in the next few years, at least, for even the best of Kosovan prosecutors and judges to handle war crimes cases because of the sensitivities and the history. So it may well be that there is still a role for EULEX there in the interest of everybody.
But have you left enough capacities in Kosovo? Do you believe you actually have built capacities for these cases to be treated by locals? What do you sincerely believe will happen when EULEX leaves to high-profile cases?
Well, I mean, 2 years can be a long time. I think there is still a chance that Kosovo will be able to move forward and convince European Union member states that they are for real and that the rule of law, without fear or favour, can gain traction.
Why? What examples have you seen in the last 3 years in terms of dealing directly with corruption that can convince you that 2 years is enough to suddenly deliver on especially fighting corruption?
Well, I mean, the essence of what we're trying to do is to show that nobody is above the law. And the hope is that that will change a culture which has been used for far too long to the idea that influence or family connections or money can buy you around trouble. I mean, that's actually a problem which is
But
not
it
just...
can. Fatma Limay bought an EULEX investigator. Money can buy you out of trouble.
Well, I wouldn't say that Mr. Limay is out of trouble in current circumstances. But
Azim Sylla certainly is. How come?
Again, I mean, there are... You know, we should wait and see what happens on some of these things.
He's been released of the investigation. When reviewing the 2012 year in our program, there's been commentators who have said that the release of Azim Sylla from all the charges, the MP who was involved in Nazim Blasa case, is one of the examples of how EULEX is politicized, because it relieved a powerful man from an investigation.
Well, I mean, I can't commentate on the rights and wrongs of the case itself, but there is a tendency, if I may, on the part of the media to jump the gun. Legal processes and cases and so on often have more life in them than it may appear. So people should avoid jumping to conclusions.
What cases do you see significant in terms of what local prosecutors have done in Kosovo so far?
There have been, and increasingly are, cases that we conduct jointly with Kosovan counterparts in the SPRK and even some in the regions also. Not all of these are very, very high profile. That's the reason we have our executive mandate. Until we can entrench the idea that nobody is above the law, that is the kind of assurance that we provide. But there are increasing cases of actions by local prosecutors in conjunction with us. When we look at the sort of people who have found themselves indicted, including by locals, they include prominent businessmen, mayors, senior policemen. There are, significant people in Kosovo, not necessarily at the very top level, but who are already being held to account by local people.
But the political elite has been very critical when this has happened, and even to EULEX, as we've seen, often intimidating prosecutors of EULEX and leading a PR battle against prosecutors of EULEX when senior political figures were involved. What does this say to local prosecutors? Hasn't this just made them even more inert to taking measures? If this is how an international would be treated, imagine how a local with a family here, a local prosecutor, will be treated if he takes upon a high-profile case.
Well, you're right. I mean, this kind of statement does make locals nervous about what will happen if they pursue something which is contrary to powerful interests. And that's one of the reasons why these statements are really regrettable. The fact is that our people are doing their jobs to the best of their ability. We can talk about EULEX imperfections, the number of people, a number of nations that we have with different traditions, the problems about translation, the constant turnover of staff with our secondments and so on. But we do our best. And I mean, as has already been commented by the High Representative and others, remarks that are made by Kosovan politicians criticising us for doing our job are damaging to Kosovo and damaging to Kosovo's image in the EU.
But on the other hand, now that your mission is over, do you think that EULEX is good value for money in terms of how many cases it has done and what money has Europe spent on it? I want to ask you whether, if this money was spent in educating 100 new prosecutors in the last 3 years, send them abroad, make them completely new elite, prosecutorial elite and new judges, would that have been a better use of money than putting it in few very expensive prosecutors who in the end will go home after 3 years?
Well, I actually think that what we do in terms of giving even the most powerful no place to hide is the most valuable thing. You can, and I'm all for it, and let's find some money and let's, which the European Commission is probably the right address for, or the OSCE, to send prosecutors abroad. I'm all for greater educational standards amongst Kosovo's prosecutors and judges, but we need to give them a framework, a no-going-back framework from which they can operate. And I think that's what we've done. And if we were to talk about North Kosovo, I mean, very, very difficult though it has been because of the political situation. If EULEX had not been there, then there wouldn't be rule of law properly in the north.
But still, in the north, no serious gangster and someone who's been doing corruption for a while and trading has been arrested.
Well, that's not true yet. I mean, Mr. Pantelic was arrested by us. He was a fairly major gangster, if you like, and he's been sentenced to 9 years in jail. That was a fully EULEX operation.
Finally, I want to talk about the government's reaction to the interception scandal, was become gate as known. The reaction of the government is, I'm being told, to actually react by limiting EULEX's powers to investigate. There are two laws in particular that are going to influence, that are being pushed through to influence EULEX's limited role, and that is the money laundering law and the interception law. How do you see these reactions?
Well, on the interception law, we just have to ensure again that the law, when it emerges, is consistent with European standards. And one crucial European standard, fundamental European standard or international standard, is the separation of the powers. So you cannot confuse what an intelligence agency might do on wiretapping and a judicial order as part of a prosecutor's job on wiretapping. And you have to ensure that you are not screening what a judge has ordered by the executive, because if you do that, you are abusing the separation.
But what's wrong with how it's happening now? Why did we need this law in the first place? Because I understand this law has begun to be worked on a year ago, even before interceptions. What's wrong with the current interception regulations?
Well, it's true that amendments to this law have been looked at amongst many other priorities for quite some time as a result of what you just described, this appearance in the public domain of of these conversations, the whole thing has moved up the priority list. I have no problem with that, and let me stress, I mean, I'm absolutely sympathetic to the outrage that Kosovan politicians have about this material finding itself in the media. It should not. The material...
Are you outraged by the public's reaction to the material that was aired? Because you seem to only be outraged about one part. Are you also outraged about what were the findings in these talks?
This telephone intercept was done as part of a case. At the point, under the law, at the point at which we indict, we have to, under the principle of equality of arms, hand over the material, and not just the material that is relevant to the case, but the context of the material. That was handed over.
So you have followed the law?
We have absolutely followed the law, as it stands. In my frame of reference, this is court material. It's privileged court material, and yet it has found its way into the media. Now,
is it really, just tell me how much do you know what law has been broken by these interceptions going to the media? Because anything that is used in court is as well public material, I understand.
You have just sort of slipped slightly in what you said. I didn't say that this was necessarily illegal. We are looking at whether it was illegal. What I'm saying is it was never intended to be in the public domain, and certainly conversations that have nothing to do with the case were never intended to be in the public domain, and that I find outrageous.
I also understand that actually when this material was given to the court and to the defense, EULEX did not, EULEX marked it as unknown male voice. All the voices that were talking to Adem Grabovci were unknown voices. Is that the case?
It might very well be, because if we are doing an intercept which is relating to a particular case, we are not interested in other extraneous conversations, whoever they might be from. It isn't the brief of our people to find out how many times the person in question has spoken to the Prime Minister or the Minister of this, that or the other. That's not the job. Therefore, it's entirely possible that what you just said is correct.
And as a result, we have a law which asks for intelligence, the intelligence institution in Kosovo, AIK, to oversee all interceptions. How is that possible?
It isn't. It's, I mean, it isn't compatible with European standards. As I just said, that would be an abuse of the separation of powers, and the European Union is strongly advising the government in that respect.
But you were, it wasn't European Union, it was EULEX who was part of the working group. Have you made these stances clear during your work in the working group?
I'm not aware that that particular angle, i.e. the need to screen all intercepts by the Kosovo Intelligence Agency, I'm not aware that that was part of the plan before. If it was, then I would have hoped that we would have objected to it.
You often, I noticed in our interview, you make references to how you are portrayed in the media. On the one hand, I find that you are concerned enough about the public image to invest money in TV adverts and campaigns, which EULEX has been doing lately. But on the other hand, whenever there is a serious corruption case, what we find on TV, most of an average Kosovan sees the lawyers of the defense speaking on TV, politicians making statements, and it's never the prosecutor, him or herself, pleading for the case and telling the argumentation that were told in court. So apart from the time when it was Van Verswijk who made very bold statements 2 years ago, you have been quiet since. Why?
Well, I think it's not a good thing in and of itself for a prosecutor to be a media star. I mean, prosecutors should be working diligently and discreetly on casework which, for very good reasons, doesn't need to see the light of day until it comes to an open trial.
What's wrong with prosecutor declaring whatever they declared in court, putting the arguments of the case, since we are going to hear about those arguments from the other sides?
It's less of a problem when we approach the trial, and there have been instances of prosecutors at the trial stage making themselves available, but I don't think it's a good thing in itself. I mean, you spoke about an earlier stage when our prosecutors were more vocal. But one of the criticisms that I would accept of EULEX is that we mismanaged expectations of the people in the early days by making them think that we were going to ride in like knights in shining armor and deal with corruption in a matter of months. We created a false impression. So it's actually better for us to not be so sort of strident in the media and instead do our job in the very painstaking, diligent and time-consuming way that we have to do it with these sensitive cases.
So if you had powers to structure the mission differently in 2007 and 2008 when you came in, what would you do to make it more efficient? Because clearly you are admitting that it's not the most efficient.
Well, I think hindsight, as we say in English, is a wonderful thing. I think if we knew in 2007-8 what we know now, we would probably not have attempted to be so much of an unmic light. We would have made it clearer that we were not unmic, and that the era of us doing police work alongside Kosovans was over, that we were now here as mentors and advisors. And we shouldn't have had so many people, because it looked too much as though we were trying to do what UNMIC did and have kind of almost a one-on-one relationship with the Kosovo rank and file. That's not what we were ever supposed to do, and I think we should have been smaller at the outset because there are inefficiencies around the way we administer ourselves simply because we're so huge. And we should have focused more on our executive capabilities with regard to the North. We do not now have adequate executive police powers in the North, and we have to rely more than we should on KFOR as a result.
And having stayed in Kosovo in general for the last 4 years, what would you say are 3 positive things about Kosovo and 3 hopeless things about Kosovo?
Well, I would say that the 3 most positive things, the strength of families in this culture and the discipline and the morality that comes with that. I mean, show me another poor country, and Kosovo is a poor country in European terms, another poor country so free of muggings and lootings as Kosovo is. I think this is down to the strength of your family structures.
But I would put the other side of the coin, that because of family structures, we seem to want to employ our families, and meritocracy is not something we apply in our society, but family connections.
I was going to say that when you come to ask me about the negatives, there is a mirror image of what I just said, and it is this nepotism thing which, as it sort of moves up through society, leads to a patronage culture at the top, and that's not good. But coming back to the positives, the hospitality of the Kosovan people, whatever their ethnicity, is warm and heartening. And the potential and the European orientation and the work ethic of your young people is something that gives me great hope. And I'm very pleased that I was able, as British ambassador, to work with Enver Hoxha, the minister at the time, on improving the standards at the tertiary level, the university level in Kosovo, because this is crucial to Kosovo's future. But if we talk about the negative stuff, well, we've spoken a lot about corruption. I would say it's more disrespect for the rules. This is partly because the people of the Kosovan Albanian community have had for hundreds of years to live under somebody else's sovereignty, which has often been hostile laws or discriminatory laws against them, tyrannical in some cases, and they have developed their own defense mechanisms and their own close society and their own rules. Now, the Kosovan Albanians are the majority holders in their own state, and they need to have a more state-oriented approach. It's not what is good for my family, how can I bend the rules, but we are all in this trying to make Kosovo work. We should pay our taxes. We shouldn't throw litter out of the car windows. And at the higher level, we should not tolerate corruption, buying driving licenses as opposed to going through proper tests for them, because all that kind of thing ratchets up to the kind of corruption that we are worried about at the top level. And if I might say, with all affection, and I have huge affection for the Kosovan people after 4.5 years here, the longest time I've ever spent anywhere since I was 21, including the UK. I would say driving, please, guys. I mean, Kosovan driving standards are just terrible. Something has to be done about it.
Thanks very much for being on Jeta në Kosovë, Mr. Sparkes. Ishte ky Andy Sparkes, ish zëvendësshefi I EULEX-it në Kosovë.